Hi, my name's Stewart Lynch. Are you confused by some of the Xcode terminology when creating your apps or viewing other open source code? What's an app template, or a target, or a scheme, or a workspace? And how will they work together? In this video, I want to try and clarify that for you.
I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee.
So as I said in the introduction, I'd like to introduce you to or try to clarify some of the terminology that you might read or hear about with respect to Xcode and the structure of an Xcode project. Understanding Xcode terminology is crucial for several reasons, especially for developers working in the Apple development ecosystem. So here are a couple of reasons why it's important to grasp Xcode terminology. In particular, the two most important reasons are related to efficient project management. First, there's clarity and organization. Knowing the terms helps you navigate and manage your projects more effectively, and you can organize your work better and understand the structure of your projects, leading to more efficient development. And second is proper setup. Understanding terms like workspaces, projects, schemes, and targets ensures that you set up your projects correctly from the start, avoiding any potential issues down the line, and I'm going to cover all of those topics. So a solid understanding of Xcode terminology is fundamental for efficient project management, streamlined debugging, optimized build and deployment processes, and overall proficiency in iOS development. This knowledge empowers you to fully leverage Xcode's capabilities, improving both your productivity and the quality of your applications. So let's get started. There is no starter project for this video, but if you want to work along with me, you can be assured that there's very little typing, and I really believe that if you follow along rather than just watch, you're more likely to grasp the topic and understand. So we're going to create a few different projects. So I suggest that you create a folder on your desktop called something like Xcode terminology, and we'll save each project in that folder for now. We'll do better than that, but that'll come later. When you create a new Xcode project, you get to choose from a template, and that template determines the destination targets. So let's start with a multi-platform app. And I'll create a new project and I'll call it multi-platform app. Once the app is created, you can click on the project folder at the top of the navigator, and you'll see that you get the project and a single target. In Xcode, an app target specifies a project settings information like your app's bundle identifier and display name, as well as which source code files belong to that app. By clicking on the target, you can see the supported destinations for that target. And since we chose multi-platform, we see that it'll support an iPhone, an iPad, and Mac initially, and the SDK it uses will be the one specified for the destination OS. So the Mac app uses Mac OS, whereas iPhone and iPad use iOS. And you can see in the preview that you can switch between an iPhone, an iPad, or a Mac destination, and the code will be displayed in each of those platforms as you would expect. If you want to execute your code differently based on a specific platform, you'd use a compiler directive within your code. For example, you might want to display the content as a VStack if you're on a Mac OS, but an HStack if on iOS. So let's first embed this block in a compiler directive if clause, which starts with a hashtag if, and then checks if the OS is Mac OS. And then I'll create an else with a hashtag else, and then a hashtag end if to end the clause. So I'm just going to paste the same code into both blocks. Well, nothing changes. But if I go back to the Mac OS block, and I think I said we're going to use a VStack, I'm going to make this an HStack here. And we'll see how our view in the Mac preview changes. So let me switch between the different devices in the preview. You won't see me make the selection as the picker is out of view, but you'll get to see the result. Switching to an iPhone or an iPad, we see that it uses a VStack. If we switch back to the Mac, it reverts to the HStack. Now, one thing that might seem confusing is that in the code, it appears that our code in the macOS code is dimmed out regardless of which destination I choose in the preview. And that's because it's tied more to the run destination from the toolbar, which will determine what simulator to launch. And you'll see the correct dimming and highlighting for the appropriate code. So right now, the run destination is my iPad, so that's why the macOS code is dimmed. If I switch to my Mac as the run destination, you'll see the reverse happens, and the macOS code is no longer dimmed, but the iOS code is. Okay, so let's close this and create another app. And this time we're going to choose the iOS template, and I'm going to call it iOS app, and I'll save it to the same Xcode terminology folder. And this time, I get an iPhone, an iPad, a Mac, and Apple Vision. But the SDK for each is iOS, so there is no need for any compiler directives in your code. It's all iOS. However, that Mac app is designed for iPad and is not really the best-in-class type of Mac app. And this time we can't use an OS compiler directive to change the layout between the iPhone, iPad, and Mac app. This just means that we're allowing our app to run on a Mac, but it'll simply be the iPad version running on an M-Series powered Mac. Now you should pay attention to the destination for your app so that you are not releasing your apps on platforms that you don't want to support or have not tested on. And you can delete any of these destinations that you want by simply selecting the destination and then tapping the minus button. So let's delete both the Mac OS and the Vision. You can also add destinations back. When choosing to add Mac OS back again, you have three choices. One's the same as what we already had, which is the Mac designed for iPad, so let's not check that one out. There's one called Mac Catalyst. Now, I don't want to get into the details of building a Mac Catalyst app here. Mac apps built with Mac Catalyst share code with your iPad apps, and you can add more features just for the Mac. Desktop class features on iPad translate beautifully onto the Mac, and your Mac's apps toolbars are automatically optimized, and document-based apps gain key features such as menu items and the ability to rename the document in the toolbar. And you can use the new Mac Catalyst APIs to enhance multi-window behaviors and add custom views to your toolbars and more. And you see here, though, that the SDK is still iOS, however, so you can't do compiler directives again. So let's remove that. If we choose the third option, which is Mac OS, then now we get to see the Mac OS SDK. So we are basically back to the multi-platform version. So let's delete this, and I'm going to make this available for iPhone only. All right, on to our third application. So we'll create a third one, and I'm going to choose iOS as the template, but I'm going to call it My App. And then I'm going to remove the Mac and Apple Vision destinations. This time, though, I want to add a new target. So from the File menu, you can choose New Target. And this gives us the ability to add all sorts of extensions like widgets or watchOS, or you can choose another platform template entirely. So let's choose macOS and the app template for the macOS. Now you'll be asked for a product name, so to distinguish it from my iPhone app, I'll call it My App and then have Mac in parentheses. And now in our navigator, you see that you have two targets showing for your project. If you select each one, you'll be able to see the destinations that it supports and which SDK the target is using. You'll also see that each target has its own set of project files. In the Project Navigator, you'll see that each target has its own set of project files. I see the entry point for iOS version here, and we see that its first view is Content View. And if I check out the entry point for the Mac version, I see the same thing. And each target has its own version of Content View. So if I select the iOS version of Content View, the preview displays just fine. But if I select the macOS version, it doesn't. Now, if I look at my options for the preview, Mac isn't even a choice. Neither is it available in the run destination. And this is because each target has a scheme associated with it. And the scheme right now is My App, and that's the iOS app. So if I change it to My App Mac from the scheme selector, we'll see that the run destination switches to My Mac and the preview starts working again. In fact, there are no other choices for the Mac preview for this target. It's only Mac OS. And we see that in the Run target as well. On the General tab, you see that each target has its own bundle identifier. And the display name is empty, so by default, it'll inherit the name of the target. So we can select the target from the toolbar, and when you select the target, you're only offered a list of run destinations for that target. So let's choose My App and run it on an iOS 15 Pro. After the app launches, I can exit to the home screen, and I see that the title of the app is My App, which was the target name. So let me change the scheme by selecting My App Mac Target and run the application on my Mac. You can see by the default, the title of the bar displays the app name, which is My App Mac. Well, I don't really want that. I want it to have the same name as my iPhone app. So there's nothing stopping us from selecting the target, then going to the General tab and overriding the app's display name to be the same as the iOS version. So I'm going to enter My App here. Now if I run it once more on the Mac, we'll see that the name has changed. Well, you also see that the bundle identifiers for both are different. And it used to be that this was a requirement for different cross-platform targets because they are from a different app store. However, you can now offer a universal purchase for your apps. And if that's the case, one price will get you both platforms. So to enable this, you simply make both bundle IDs the same. So right now we have the run destination on the toolbar to use the macOS target and My Mac. If I click on the content view in the navigator for the My App iOS app, you'll see that the preview says that it cannot preview this file. If you open the Inspector tab and the File Inspector, you'll see that the file's target membership is only used for the My App target and not the Mac target. So let's check it. Well, when you do that, you get an invalid redeclaration of Content View. And that's because we have a view called Content View that has a target of My App Mac in both targets. So if you select the one in the My App Mac, you can see that that's the case there as well. You are allowed to share content between targets so long as the structs or classes are not named the same. So what happens if we delete the content view in the My App Mac's target? Well, the errors go away, and the preview for the selected scheme displays the Mac app. I can choose the My App iOS target, and it switches to an iPhone and displays the proper view right here now too. Now there are many instances where you might want to share code between targets. These might be extensions or some shared type views, but for most part, they can be used in both targets. If, however, these views might require some slight tweaking for each platform destination, then we need to use compiler directives to do so. So let me show you a bit of a contrived example here, but you'll get the idea. I'm on an iOS target right now. So in Content View, which is being shared by both targets, I want to add a button to the VStack that has a label, Tap Here. If I switch to the macOS target, it works just fine in the preview, but we see that it still says Tap Here, which it really should say Click Here, because we don't tap on a Mac, we click with a mouse. So even though this file is being shared between both targets, you can still have a compiler directive that can change based on the OS. So I can use a compiler directive here, where I first check to see if the OS is macOS, and then create a label constant that is the string click here. And then for else with an end if, I can let the label be tap here for the iOS versions. And then we can change the label string to use that constant. Now it shows up correctly for each platform. Now I said that this was a contrived solution because there is actually a better solution here. So let's go back to the original version. Now I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to search for and choose string catalog. And I'm going to make sure that I add this to both targets. So this string catalog is going to be able to be used in both the iOS and the macOS versions. Now when I build the application, you'll see that both the Hello World and the Tap Here strings are listed in the catalog. Well, Hello World is okay, but it's that Tap Here string that I want to vary by device. So it just so happens if you right-click on that string, Vary by Device is an option. So I'm going to choose Mac because it is the outlier. And now I'm going to change Tap Here for Mac to be Click Here. And I'll leave the other as is. Now when I switch back to Content View, as you switch between targets, you see that our strings are displayed correctly. At this point, we have this folder called Xcode Terminology. And inside, we have these sample applications. And these are all related to the terminology tutorial. Wouldn't it be nice if I could have a single project, so to speak, that I could open that would give me access to all of the examples? Well, you can. And that is what a workspace is. It's basically a glorified folder for your projects. So let's open Xcode, and then from the File menu, I'm going to choose Create a New Workspace. Now the destination will be the Xcode Terminology folder, and I'm just going to call it Workspace. And it can actually be any name. Now this will open up a new empty workspace. Now I find the best way to add an existing project to a workspace is simply to drag and drop. So open one of the projects and locate the Xcode proj file. Now make sure you arrange your windows so that you see the Xcode Terminology folder along with the Workspace files navigation pane. And then drag that proj file into the Workspace navigator, and the entire project gets added to the workspace. And then you can repeat this for each of the other projects. But be careful not to embed inside one of the other projects when you drag and drop. So I find it always easier if I always drag above the last project, and then I'm fine. Now, as you can see, when I drag the dual target, my app, to the workspace, both targets are added as well. Now, if I exit Xcode, I can launch it by double-clicking on the Workspace file, and it'll open up the workspace, giving me access to all of my projects. Now, I find this really useful, especially when I have a number of related projects that I'm working on, and I'm able to search for any content within any of the projects within this workspace. I do this when I'm taking a course from Udemy, for example, that has multiple projects, and I want to keep them all in one place and be able to switch easily between them. And there are lots of other things you can do with a workspace, such as adding frameworks that can be shared amongst projects, but this is beyond the scope of this tutorial. However, there's one thing that I find particularly useful that I just discovered, which is creating a shared scheme. Right now, you can see that the scheme that is selected is the iOS app scheme. So this means that we can view the content for that app. But if I choose another iOS-based app, like our multi-platform app, the view doesn't appear. And that's because we need to select the scheme for that app. And this scheme will allow me to run both iOS and macOS apps, so I could change the run destination here as well, as we saw before. So each of the projects must be run under a valid scheme. So to make things a little easier for you, you can create a scheme that will work on all the iOS projects in your workspace. Let's try this out. So let's select the iOS app first and change the scheme to that app. Next, I'm going to choose to create a new scheme, and we'll see that the initial target will be that iOS app. And I'm going to call it any iOS app. Once it's been created, I want to edit it. In the build section, I can see that the iOS app is selected as the target. Well, I can click the plus button, and then I can add any of my iOS targets from all of my projects to this scheme. And I can add multiple selections by holding the Command key down. And I'm only selecting the targets that support iOS, and that's our multi-platform app and the My App target for our dual target app. Now I can select any of these projects with that any iOS scheme. Well, I could do the same for Mac. So let me create a new project first to make sure that it is just a Mac app. Now I'm going to save it to the Xcode terminology folder. I could actually add it to the workspace directly here by creating a new project, but I always mess this up and accidentally add to a group and it gets nested. So instead, I'm just going to create the project outside of the workspace and save it to that folder and use my tried and true drag and drop method. Well, now I have 3 projects that support macOS. If I select my new Mac-only app, I have to choose that target to get it to run or display in my preview. And when I do that and move to another project that is under macOS, the content doesn't display. So we'll do exactly the same thing. So let me create a new schema. And I'll change the original target here to be the macOS only app. And I'll change the name to any Mac app. So let me edit that schema now. And I'm going to add in all of my macOS targets. And that's the multi-platform app, the Mac app target, and the target for the My app that is macOS. Now, with that scheme selected, I can choose any of my projects and targets that support macOS, and we're good to go. If I choose my multi-platform app, I know it supports both iOS and macOS, so I can choose either any iOS scheme here or the macOS scheme, and I see that it works for both. So that's it for this video. I actually learned something new myself when creating this video, so I hope you have too. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. You can subscribe to my channel to get notifications of new videos. And remember, you can also download my YouTube channel listing app for free from Gumroad and get quick access and searchability of all of my 300+ videos. A link is in the description.